On July 31st, 1988, two hunters found the skeletal remains of a person sitting against a tree on Republican Mountain, just a mile from Silver Plume. Near the remains were a deceased dog, a backpack, and a revolver. The remains were discovered to be those of Silver Plume resident Tom Young and his dog Gus.
This video contains mature subject matters including graphic violence, death, and assault. This video is not intended for anyone under 18 years of age.
As a sports writer for the Daily Herald in Algonquin, Illinois, Keith Reinhard was feeling every bit of his 49 years. Keith was still a newlywed, married only 3 years to his wife, Carolyn. He had 3 children from a previous marriage. Keith needed some changes in his life. He decided to let his hair grow out as well as his beard. He wanted to have some life experiences that he might not be able to have as he aged. According to Keith's son, Sven, Keith was apprehensive about turning 50. Talking to his old friend Ted Parker, who lived in Silver Plume, Colorado, and operated the KP Cafe, he decided to take a 3-month hiatus from his job in Chicago. Ted encouraged him to spend some time in Silver Plume, and that's exactly what Keith decided to do. With the blessing of his wife, Keith moved to Silver Plume for 3 months. His plan was to work on the novel that he always wanted to write, lose some weight, and conquer his fear of heights by hiking the beautiful but rugged Colorado mountains. Not only did he love writing, but was a photographer and enjoyed panning for gold. When Keith arrived in Silver Plume, he took a small apartment at the back of a Catholic church and decided to open an antique store which also sold matted photographs. Keith learned that the retail space he was renting was previously a bookstore owned by a Silver Plume resident who had recently gone missing, Tom Young. Not a lot is known about Mr. Young. He ran a bookstore that frankly was not doing well. The small town of Silver Plume had only just over 100 residents, and although the well-traveled I-70 ran through the town, there just weren't enough customers to keep the bookstore afloat. Mr. Young had previously been Army Special Forces and a schoolteacher in Arvada, Colorado. Tom had a dog by the name of Gus, who was truly his best friend. It seems that Tom may have been lonely. There was no great love, best friends, or even children that have come forward to talk about Tom. Mr. Young began to inform residents of Silver Plume about a trip to Europe that he would soon be taking. No one saw Mr. Young after the date of December 7th, 1987. He was not reported missing for 3 weeks due to the fact that people who knew him believed him to be vacationing in Europe. As Keith learned more about the disappearance of Tom Young, he decided to make his disappearance a part of his novel. Keith interviewed all of the townspeople, and some say he became quite obsessed over Tom being missing. Mr. Reinhard hoped that his antique shop would do well and that his wife would be able to move there. However, the antique shop did not do well. It is known that Tom contacted the paper and asked to cover the Chicago Bulls when he returned home. The paper being the paper he worked for in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On July 31st, 1988, two hunters found the skeletal remains of a person sitting against a tree on Republican Mountain, just a mile from Silver Plume. Near the remains were a deceased dog, a backpack, and a revolver. The remains were discovered to be those of Silver Plume resident Tom Young and his dog Gus. Both were shot in the head. The Clear Creek Sheriff's Office and coroner both declared Mr. Young's death a suicide. 1 week later, on August 7th, 1988, Keith Reinhard locked up his shop at 2:30 in the afternoon. He walked around telling everyone that he would be hiking up Pendleton Mountain. Apparently, he even told strangers that he would be attempting that hike and let people know that he would be back by 10 p.m. that night. He joked that if he didn't return, they should summon a rescue team. Mr. Reinhard had attempted this hike once before, retreating due to experiencing vertigo or like dizziness, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was last seen at 4:30 p.m. that day wearing blue jeans, tennis shoes, and a flannel shirt. He was not seen with a backpack, water, or any other gear. Pendleton Mountain is considered a challenging 10-mile out-and-back hike with 1,800 feet of elevation gain. So out and back meaning you go to the destination, you come back, it's a 10-mile total.
There and back.
There and back. It's
okay.
In the hiking world, it's called out and back.
Out and back, because you're outside.
No, it's because some hikes are just a loop or some sort of circle that you just go in one direction and then you end up back where you came from. And some you actually hike on one trail to your destination and then return on the same trail.
Not to be nitpicky, but it also seems like there and back would have sufficed. I
agree. Now I feel like I have like something. The top of the mountain stands at 12,275 feet. Many stated that the hike can be completed in 6 hours. As a hiker, I would definitely say 10 miles, 1,800 feet of elevation, 6 hours does sound very reasonable for this hike. Remembering also that it is, I believe, August, right?
In Colorado elevation, which is much harder to do.
Yes, but I mean, at this point, he had been acclimated, I believe, for a couple of months before he attempted this hike.
3 months.
So it's not like he was just here and he hadn't acclimated to the elevation yet. As I researched this story, very many people stated that it was irresponsible to begin this hike at 4:30 p.m. In my experience hiking in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, it is absolutely not unusual in any way whatsoever to begin a summer hike in the afternoon. I have hiked many times in the summer in the afternoon and even at night. In the summer and actually in the winter.
But let's be clear to the viewers that you are a very seasoned hiker, whereas this man was absolutely in a million years not.
Sure, but I have a little bit of an issue with a lot of people saying it was unreasonable for him to leave at 4:30 in the summer.
But maybe they're looking at him being who he is. It is a town of 100 people, a little over 100 people. And they must know that the Chicago man could not make a hike that well, especially in the clothing.
Okay, and I mean, I think that's a very fair point. I personally would not find beginning a hike at 4:30 p.m. to be irresponsible. I would, however, agree that hiking without water or any gear, including a headlamp or flashlight, back in 1988 is not smart. When the townspeople realized he had not returned, a search party was sent out. The Colorado Alpine Rescue Team sent out no fewer than 125 people, a dozen dogs, and an aircraft for a week. They found no sign of Mr. Reinhard.
And in fact, there was an accident on that mountain.
That's correct.
One of the helicopter flyers or plane.
I think it was a plane.
Oh.
I could be wrong.
One of the aerial flyers.
Yes.
Crashed into the side of the mountain trying to help look for him.
And one person died in that crash. Yeah, that's very sad. As the local sheriff's office searched his personal space, there was a newspaper clipping detailing the finding of Tom Young's body sitting next to Keith's manuscript that he had been writing. The main character of Keith's book was Guy Gypsum, who was said to be a combination of the personalities of both Keith and Tom. Here is the last paragraph Keith had written in his novel. Guy Gypsum changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt. He understood Tom now and his motivation. Guy closed the door, then walked off towards the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above.
Above?
Yeah.
Well, I have thoughts on that later.
So now we have two men who lived in the same town, who ran a business out of the same retail space, who both went missing. One man was found deceased, with the cause of death being suicide. The other man's remains have never been found. So Keith has never been found to this day. His body is still missing. Keith met a woman at a party named either Greta or Gretchen who lived in Denver about 1 month before his disappearance. I understand from a family member that the police were able to find her, but she was not able to give any details that would help solve the mystery. Two college students exploring Pendleton Mountain in 2021 found Keith Reinhardt's wallet, but there was no other sign of his remains or clothing. So I'd like to cover each possibility of what could have happened here.
Okay.
The first is animal attacks. It is known that the Colorado Mountains is home to both black bears and mountain lions. Many people speculate that Mr. Reinhardt could have been attacked by a predator. Mountain lion attacks are very rare, and deaths caused by mountain lions are even more rare.
It's true. We see them more often than there are attacks.
And as a matter of fact, it's an adult man could usually fight off a mountain lion. I mean, you should fight back, but it is possible to fight off a mountain lion.
That happened recently.
It happened recently in Fort Collins. Maybe 3 years ago. Yeah. As far as bears go, there are an estimated 17,000 to 20,000 black bears in Colorado.
Well,
that's a lot, right?
Sounds like a lot. Compared to our millions, not so much, but...
True.
a family of mine hiking in the mountains, and then we run across a family of black bears. Sounds pretty terrifying.
But they're pretty afraid of humans, and that's very smart of them. They should be afraid of humans, and they will usually run away.
That's true.
Attacks by black bears are also uncommon. There have only been 4 documented deaths caused by bears in the history of Colorado.
Wow.
So in all of Colorado, 4 deaths caused by bears.
Years.
Yes. So I would just say personally, I think it would be extremely unlikely that Keith was killed by an animal.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that they found his wallet. So I think that it's reasonable to think that maybe his body was dragged off by an animal after he had died.
Extremely possible. If he did die on
Pendleton Mountain, then absolutely animals would possibly most likely consume all or parts of his body. They may pull parts of his body to other locations. Animals are very well known to do that. So for them to, like, if he did die on that mountain, then yeah, it's possible to find his wallet somewhere different. Maybe even generally in the place that he died. And then his body
also
was
maybe
brought
not.
somewhere else.
Like, large cats are known to bring their prey into a tree to save for later. Animals do all kinds of things with parts of deceased remains. So just because they found his wallet in one place doesn't mean that his body is exactly nearby. It could still be. Okay. It could be somewhat nearby, but not necessarily exactly in the same spot.
Sure. I mean that he could have died where they found the wallet, and he could have been dragged off to anywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
It's too bad no one knows if he kept his wallet in his front pocket or his back pocket.
Why?
Back pocket would be easier to fall out of if being dragged away.
Oh, smart. Some people speculate that both Tom and Keith found out something that got them both murdered. I've never read any information about what the dangerous information could be that they both could have found, but obviously they both rented the same retail space, they lived in the same town, and they both disappeared. Obviously, they disappeared within months of each other. Obviously, that's going to bring up a lot of speculation. One idea was that there may have been illegal dumping of nuclear materials and that they both became aware of this, which endangered them. That kind of sounds crazy to me.
So I looked into this, and this area... So the police department actually isn't from Silver Plume. It's from a nearby town, and they would come in because the town is so small. They didn't need
they don't have
department.
Yeah.
So this area had been known for dumping well before Tom Young came into it.
Specifically nuclear material, just a variety of materials.
Hazardous material.
Okay.
They don't mention nuclear in the papers I read.
Okay.
But I think if they had still been dumping at that time, there would have been more papers, because as I was looking through the newspapers, I saw nothing within 20 years about dumping in that area, illegal dumping.
Okay.
So I think that that's far-fetched to think that that was still happening after these companies had gotten in trouble and made a big made a big deal about it in the papers for everybody to know. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that was still happening in that time.
Okay. Another speculation that some people have had is that they could have encountered an illegal marijuana grow area that could have led to their demise. Mm-hmm. I have a little bit of an issue with this because I know what the area is like. And while there are valleys in the Rocky Mountains where it's possible that would be possible to grow marijuana, and the area that they're talking about, it's pretty rocky, and I couldn't imagine there being an illegal grow area around there.
And I also looked at Google Maps for this area. When I looked at that area, it didn't look like there was any old or new or current farmland.
Yeah, I don't think there would be any farmland in that area.
Yeah, there's a lot of trees, and there are a lot of rocks, like you said.
It's the Rocky Mountains, and it's called that for a reason. It's very rocky.
And I don't think that...
And it's very dry.
Yeah, and based off the Google Maps, with the special view that you can see all of like the photos of the area, nothing looked like anything had ever been a grow of any kind.
I agree.
Farmland, illegal or legal marijuana growth.
But to be clear and respond on something that you said, while marijuana is legal to grow a certain number of plants at this time, it would not have been during their disappearance.
So that's true. I should have said that. And so when I looked this up, I was looking for an area that would have been perfect for marijuana growth. And at the time it would have been illegal. So that would have made sense. These people growing marijuana don't want their secret to get out, and so they're murdered. Right. But as we learn later, both men went in two different directions and disappeared in two different directions. So neither of those directions showed signs of any farm growth or marijuana growth in a whole perimeter of Silver Plume.
Okay. There is speculation that there could have been carbon monoxide in the building. A study has shown that inhaling this over a period of time can contribute to suicide rates. Some believe that this is what happened to both men. While some have speculated about this, I have not read anything that there has been an investigation into carbon monoxide issues in the building that they both leased.
So actually, I had to look into this. So I have some interesting things for you. I looked at two things. I looked at the CDC website and another government website to find out the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning, because I felt that the CDC website wasn't offering enough information, so I wanted a secondary government opinion. So carbon monoxide poisoning's effects are headache, dizziness, weakness, upset stomach, vomiting, chest pain, and confusion.
Wow.
The symptoms are often described as flu-like. If you breathe in a lot of carbon monoxide, it can make you pass out or kill you.
Right.
People who are sleeping or drunk can die from this poisoning before they even have symptoms. Impairment of the cerebral function, visual disturbances in carbon monoxide poisoning can take around 24 hours to leave the body once the poisoning stops. I did the Google Maps search again. I went to the area. I looked at the house that he was staying in, the shop, and I saw that it was for sale. And so I went to the for sale website and I got to see a lot of the photos of the inside.
Nice.
And there is still a lot of beautiful decor from 200 years ago. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the number of wood stoves in the house in order to heat the house. Multiple inside the house and outside the house. And so it just seemed that if they don't have a heater now, which I'm sure they do because of regulations, then I'm not sure, was he using his wood stoves that he had in order to heat his business and house?
And let me just comment on that real quick. Even though it was summer in Colorado can still be chilly, especially if there's a wind or it's overcast or rainy. And nights in Colorado in the summertime can definitely...
In the mountains, too.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. In the mountains can be cold, for sure.
Exactly.
So, I mean, you would most likely need some form of heat.
And in this time, these old houses, did they have updated...
They're drafty.
They are drafty. These old houses, did they have proper insulation? What were their R values when they were still relying on wood stoves for heat? So, either way, there are various wood stoves still throughout this building. There could have also been lead and asbestos exposure in a house this old. However, neither of those would account for the crazy idea to go hiking at night without proper equipment.
It wasn't night, though. It was the afternoon.
4:30 p.m.
Yes, it's the afternoon in the summer.
And you get 4 hours max daylight in the mountains after 4:30 p.m.
Yes, it would eventually become dark during this hike if he had completed it, for sure.
That's how the world turns. It does always eventually become dark. It is darkest before the light. Those of you who wanted to look into this house yourselves, the address is 855 Main Street, Silver Plume, Colorado, 80476. You can see for yourself, and I'll put up photos of the wood stoves that are still inside this house.
And I would like to comment on the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning, I seriously doubt anybody under the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning would be like, hey man, I'm going to go hike this somewhat difficult hike up to the top of this mountain when I'm afraid of hikes. And the last time I got dizzy and I have carbon monoxide poisoning, which is making me more dizzy and I'm vomiting, but I'm going to go do this hike. So,
and this is the effect of the cerebral function, the impairment of, because you think, oh, I'm going to go do this thing. And it seems normal to you. You don't realize that you are malfunctioning mentally.
But I mean, if he was vomiting, I seriously doubt he would say, I'm going to go. I mean, hiking can be extremely difficult. And this sounds like a not very easy hike to me.
And we don't know that he was vomiting.
But I'm saying if he did have all of these symptoms, or even half of these symptoms, he would most likely not want to go hiking.
I would say headache, dizziness, weakness, chest pain, all of those things you could probably still take a hike with. The only remaining are upset stomach and vomiting and confusion. But this hike is not a walk to a lovely stream over there, and I'm going to pet a deer, and I'm going to turn around and come back. This is a somewhat grueling hike up a mountain. And that's what I'm saying. Cerebral function. He's not thinking clearly.
Sure, but I'm just saying
this is the point where my book takes hold. I have to go live this through. I mean,
I can see what you're saying. A person may not be thinking clearly. For that, I'm with you. But if he was feeling as horribly as possible with this, if he was poisoned, then most likely he physically wouldn't have been able to go on a grueling. This is not a lovely walk in the park. This is actually a hard hike.
Sure. Yes. And that this is one theory that I've come up with. If he was experiencing the cerebral impairment that I'm discussing, he went off on a hike. It wasn't for 24 hours that he came to and realized, what am I doing out here? He has no idea where he's at. He has no idea how to find the town. He doesn't know where the nearest river is. So he slowly starts to die of dehydration.
So you think this is a possibility?
I think it is a possibility. I don't think that he would have made the hike if he had had the upset stomach and vomiting. But I think everything else is possible.
Okay.
And I think that if this was the case, it would have had to be where he went out, didn't know what was going on. He just thought this was a good idea. I'm going to go do this, not thinking clearly. And then 24 hours later, when it came out of his system, he realized, I don't know where I am. I don't know how to get back. We don't have cell phones at this time. There is no Life 360 to hit a button where somebody can come find you.
Right. And he did, prior to hiking, he not only told people in town what he was going to do, he told strangers what he was going to do.
Which is also very interesting.
He walked up to strangers, people he didn't know, and said, hey, I'm going to go hike up here. Haha, if you don't find me, come look for me in the morning.
It sounds a lot like Cloud 9. And I'm sure many of you have been there, where you feel on top of the world and maybe even euphoric. And you're walking down the street and you say hey to somebody, and then they say hey back. And you're like, it's my birthday or whatever. And you're giving out information.
I see what you're saying.
That you don't know these people, but you feel really good about something that's happening in life. And so you give a total stranger complete random information about you that they'll never use.
Yeah.
You'll never see them again.
Right.
And
that you're in a good mood. And so you're telling people something that you maybe wouldn't normally say, but you're feeling good and happy. And you're like, hey, check out what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And then the other thought is, before suicide, whole separate thought here. Before suicide, many people act like they're on cloud 9.
Sure, but we're going to save that for later.
We're saving it for later.
Okay. One very plausible theory is that Keith Reinhard got lost while hiking that night, or that he had an injury and was unable to save himself. He had no gear whatsoever. If he fell and got injured to the point that he could not move, it would only be a short period of time before he succumbed to dehydration because the man brought no water.
Yep.
If he did indeed die from exposure or injury, most likely animals did consume his remains, which would explain why his wallet would be found in an area where no remains were found.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to what I just said. If he was out of his mind going into a hike that he is not familiar with, at 4:30 p.m. with only a few hours left of daylight, no water, not having proper clothing. 24 hours later, after leaving that house with the carbon monoxide or his work, he would realize, what am I doing out here? And I will put up a map of the hike, the mountain he went to hike to, and you will see the rivers that flow from this mountain and see that the direction he went, he would not have found water unless walking like directly east or west. It was not an easy find. He absolutely would have died from dehydration. And you know, I would rather have poisoning from the water than die of dehydration to get me to a town. He wouldn't have even found that.
I've had dehydration a couple times in my life. I'm a little prone to it, and it is not comfortable. And I even got help before it became too bad. So
it's extremely painful to die of dehydration.
Yes, I do not wish that on anyone except for Dennis Rader. Sorry. I'll let it go, I promise, within a couple of minutes.
Tough.
The coroner's office and Clear Creek County Sheriff's Department both ruled the death of Tom Young a suicide. Mr. Young had purchased a revolver only 4 days before he went missing. There are a couple things that make people suspicious of the suicide ruling. Ballistics never conclusively matched Tom's gun to the bullet that killed him. Also, the gun was found several feet from his body. One study found that when using a handgun to commit suicide, 24% of the time the gun would still be in the deceased person's hand. 69% of the time the gun would be within 30 centimeters to the body, which is less than 1 foot. So now we're talking about 93% of the time that gun is either going to be in their hand or within a foot of their body when a person commits suicide using a handgun. So that leaves 7% of the time that it could be farther than 1 foot from the body. And my understanding is the gun that was found was several feet away from his body. So that's unusual.
Incredibly unusual.
Incredibly unusual. Lastly, Tom and Gus were found deceased underneath a green tarp. Their bodies had been covered. I do think there's a strong possibility that Tom Young did die by suicide. As I stated earlier, there's not a lot known about the man, so it's hard to gauge whether this could be in his character or not. Many residents of Silver Plume stated they did not believe that Tom would ever injure his beloved dog, Gus.
And I want to add to this thought here. When it comes to the Army Special Forces, for those of you who don't know, I didn't know. I had to look into this. They take on terrorism in other countries. So this means that Tom Young was adept in fighting and gun usage. So for him to go down, if someone were to attack them, I feel like there would have been a fight. And I'm not saying that he didn't commit suicide. I'm not saying that he was murdered. But the whole thing is very strange. I don't believe most people would kill their dog when they're committing suicide for themselves. Maybe if there was a religion that they shared where their dog would go with them into the afterlife.
What if his dog was sick and nobody knew it, and his dog was going to die?
Well, they wouldn't have put an autopsy on a dog, so
no, they wouldn't have.
That's a very good guess. And I think that if somebody killed him, then there should have been more evidence for the fighting. I don't think that he would have just allowed this to happen. I don't think there would have been fingerprints necessarily, because everyone knows how easy it is to put on a glove.
But I mean, it is odd that they were covered by a tarp. I understand the tarp was tattered by the time that the bodies were found, tattered from the weather and stuff. So it appears that the tarp had probably been on for a period of time. The winters in Colorado, especially in the mountains, can be very brutal. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be surprised if the tarp had been on them from somewhat near the beginning of their death, that the tarp would not be in great condition. But it is really odd. The tarp is odd. I mean, if Tom did that himself, then was he trying to hide the bodies, or was he trying to bring attention to the bodies? Because if somebody sees a random tarp in the forest, they're going to be like, hey, there's a tarp. What's underneath it? Right?
I know not to look under tarps. Yeah, I think two things here. If this was a shelter, let's just say this was a shelter and someone came up and killed them at some point while they were sheltered. The tarp would have had sticks, rope, something nearby that would have indicated, because he was against a tree.
Yes, he was sitting against a tree when they found his body.
So you'd think that the tarp would have some amount of stability somewhere. Whether it had collapsed or not, you would find ropes still.
I mean, there's no way the tarp would stay over their bodies throughout the... We get a lot of wind here. It can be very windy.
Yep.
There's no way that tarp would have stayed on the bodies unless the tarp was kept on with rocks or something.
And that brings me to my second thought. If the tarp had covered them and rocks were at least the corners or something, that's not something he really would have been able to do on his own and then crawl under without the rocks coming off.
And even if he could, and then he killed himself, how far could that gun go? Right. That when the tarp is covering you and it's pushed down with rocks to keep it from flying off. So I'd love to hear your guys' opinion about the whole tarp, rock, gun thing.
It's very peculiar.
It is. I agree. Yeah. It's very odd. In regards to Keith, his wife Carolyn firmly believes he would not commit suicide and that he was generally a happy, cheerful guy. Although others state that he was unhappy in Chicago, unhappy in Silver Plume, and felt that he had no other options.
There's a couple different interesting things that popped out to me about Keith. He was on a 90-day leave from Chicago. People speculate, was this a midlife crisis? And so did he walk into the mountains for a suicide, right? The APA defines a midlife crisis as a period of psychological distress thought to occur in some individuals during the middle years of adulthood, roughly between the ages of 35 to 65. Causes may include significant life events and health or occupational problems and concerns. However, no empirical data exists to support the notion that this distress is specific to midlife, and many researchers consider the midlife crisis a myth. Now, Keith went missing on August 7th in 1988, had a 90-day leave from Chicago, moved to Silver Plume in June of 88. He would have been ending his leave in August. So my question is, did he not want to go back? A week before his disappearance, Tom's body was found and Keith went to his funeral. And the night before Keith's disappearance, he went to a party. So it seems that he was so enveloped in the story of Tom that all these things played out within that week and he just snap knew what he was going to do. I wanted to comment about the census. So this is a slow growing town. And now Keith thought he hoped that his store would be successful enough. Now the census at the time in 1990, there were 134 people in this town compared to the 2021 census. There were 204. So this is not a quick growing town. Yeah. It is very small. And I don't really understand how he thought that he would be largely successful and be able to move his wife out to this small town that has, what was his shop again? What store did he?
It was, I believe, antiques with some matted photos as well, because he was also a photographer.
I don't know how he would have thought I could make a life here. You know, he's used to making big bucks as a Chicago writer. His wife is a working person, and for them to just up and drop their lives and come here where they, it doesn't really make sense. Now, I wanted to discuss the area of Silver Plume the day he disappeared. So, on August 7th, the weather Keith experienced on Pendleton Mountain was a high of 80 and a low of 49. Definitely chilly, but you could sleep through it. You're not going to die.
Yeah.
No recorded precipitation. In order to hike up Pendleton Mountain, a person has to start at Colorado Road 352 in Idaho Springs, which is a 5.9 mile drive. There is no other trail start for that mountain. if Keith went to Pendleton Mountain, then he would not have had access to nearby rivers because they do not directly cross where Keith would have walked. Now, from my research, it seems that he left Silver Plume directly and headed south, which means no trail. There is a drop after Silver Plume, and like as the town ends, there's a drop before you get to Pendleton Mountain. So he is walking down and then up.
And that's not uncommon in hikes throughout the Rocky Mountains. It's very frustrating,
It seems like he thought this was a stroll.
Definitely not.
For a category, what did you say the category was for this?
I actually didn't read a category, and you're right, it should have had a category for the hike, but with the amount of elevation gain, it would have been, let's say, medium to difficult hike, depending on your skill level.
Would you ever wear what he wore on a hike like that?
I actually still see people wear jeans
Would you wear this, though?
I would not wear this because when I go on hikes, I try to have the least amount of gear that will give me the most amount of protection if I need.
Sure.
Like I always have some sort of rain gear. I always have a warm piece just in case I'm caught out there. I always have a headlamp. There are things that I always have in case of something happening, like whatever happened to Keith.
So, and that brings me kind of to the next idea. Tom disappeared off Republican Mountain.
Yes.
Tom was found off of Republican Mountain. Keith went south towards Pendleton Mountain. If you look at the map for Silver Plume, you have Republican Mountain to the north and Pendleton Mountain to the south. Silver Plume is right in between. So for as obsessed as Keith seemed to be about Tom and his life, he went to a whole different mountain. And that's peculiar to me. It seems like he wasn't exactly in his right mind for a writer who wants to become this character that is enveloped in Tom Young's disappearance and life. And someone who wants to overcome mountains. He chose quite a scary one. At 4:30 p.m. where the sun, and in the mountains, when the sun sets at 8:30 for Denver, it is already setting at 7:30. You are losing light early.
It definitely depends on where you are, because you could be, let's say, if you're on the west face of a mountain, you may have more sun for longer. If you're on maybe the east part or the southern part, you may not have sunlight after 6 o'clock. I mean, you're still going to see sunlight in the sky, but you're going to be in shade.
And so what is your opinion so he headed south, but would have been on the north side of Pendleton Mountain between 5:30 and 6?
I mean, I would think that he would have daylight in that situation still.
Yeah. So I think that it's peculiar that he chose a different mountain than Tom, and that he just wandered off towards the direction.
Well, he had already had an interest in hiking up Pendleton Mountain, and he had left before due to vertigo. So maybe in his mind, he still wanted to overcome the vertigo, overcome the fear of heights that he had. So maybe he was I always kind of thought that he was trying it again, and that the reason he joked to people about, if you don't see me, call the rescue in the morning, was because he had an issue before and he has a fear of heights, and he was just kind of joking with them that if they didn't see him. But one great thing that he did do was telling people where he was going. And people should always do that when a lot of people think of a hike as something easy. I'm going for a little stroll. We're going to see a cute deer and maybe a bunny. There might be a river. Then we're going to turn around and come back. It's going to be so easy. A lot of hikes in Colorado are nowhere like that. And people die in our Rocky Mountains in Colorado every single year for being underprepared for what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
And you asked me if I would wear what he was wearing. No, but I see people hike in jeans and inadequate shoes. I see people hike without water bottles. Without any gear whatsoever. I see it. It is a common thing. We are, almost 40 years later. I still see this all the time. I see people hiking around sundown and they have no gear. It doesn't look like they have a headlamp in any way. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going to happen with these people when the sun goes down in a few minutes and they're whatever. I mean, I'm not going to get involved with what people are doing. That's their right to be out there in the way that they want. I just don't think it's just not smart. Okay, so I would like to tell you my theory of what happened.
Great, I can't wait.
Okay, so I think it's probably most likely that Tom did go and kill himself. I know that there's just no other evidence for anything else happening. I know it's strange with the gun, it's strange with the tarp, etc. But I think most likely he did go kill himself. And I think that when Keith moved to Colorado, I think Keith really was feeling his age and was probably feeling like, man, I'm old now. I'm getting old and I'm maybe not so happy where I live. I'm not necessarily so happy with working for this newspaper. And so his friend was like, come to Silver Plume. And so Keith was like, okay, this is going to be it. I'm going to move here. Things are going to work out. Things are going to work out. My life is going to get better. And so he came to Colorado and he probably did really enjoy the life. It's wonderful to be in the mountains.
He romanticized the idea.
Yes. Too. And then he was like, I'm starting this antique store. I'm going to be able to move my wife down here. But the antique store didn't go well. He couldn't move his wife down. And now his 3 months were almost over. And he's thinking, oh my God, I have to go back to that. And I just don't want to go back to that. Meanwhile, he's getting all wrapped up in this death of Tom Young. And then what happens? They find Tom's body and they believe it's a suicide. And that just changed everything for Keith. Because Keith really was just so wrapped up in this mystery with Tom. But then to find out that Tom most likely killed himself, I think Keith was just like,
probably broken a little.
Keith was kind of a little broken knowing that Tom killed himself. He was broken knowing he had to go back to Chicago and he didn't want to do it. He was broken because he did not overcome his fear of heights. His antique store didn't do well. Now he has to go back home and Tom is dead. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to go out the way Tom did. And that's why he left that weird paragraph about putting on his flannel shirt and hiking into the mountains. And he left it where people could find it. And that was the end. I think that he knew he never had any intention of coming back. He was going to go up there and he was going to get lost up there and he knew he wouldn't make it out. He didn't have water. He didn't have gear. He didn't know what he was doing. And I think it's possible that Keith probably killed himself.
And do you think that carbon monoxide poisoning helped also bring him to this idea?
I don't really know if carbon monoxide played a role. I have no idea, but I do know with all of those old stoves in there definitely could have been a buildup in that building. I know that that's possible.
I really do think you have something here. I think that whether Tom Young killed himself or not, I think even the police saying, yeah, Tom committed suicide. I think that was potentially the aha moment for Keith. This is also what I have to do. He could have been so wrapped up in his book writing that he was Guy Gypsum at this moment.
Yes.
And he was feeling his muse, Tom Young, who helped in a way write this book.
And also the death of, or knowing that Tom most likely committed suicide could have also screwed up whatever was happening in his novel. He had this certain idea of Tom and then finding out he killed himself. He's like, oh shit, now where's my book going to go? Because this is not what I was thinking, for my book.
I think that's very reasonable, actually. Yeah.
I'd like to comment on hiking in places like the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Although hiking is generally just walking, in the mountains there are many factors to be considered. Weather can change very quickly. Are you prepared for rain, lightning, snow, or extreme winds? It can snow in the Rocky Mountains in the summer. I've seen it multiple times. And lightning is actually very common in the afternoon as well in the summer. What if you get injured? Did you bring water? Does anyone know where you've gone? It's important that you tell someone about your plans and when you will return.
Even you, as experienced as you are with hiking, when you go into the mountains, you contact me before you go And you tell me exactly where you'll be and when you expect to be home.
Yep.
So that way I know, okay, I haven't heard from her. She isn't home. I need to contact someone right now before it is too late.
Every single time.
I do not wait for the next morning. If she does not contact me by the time she said, then I immediately start figuring out my next step, which is calling.
It's always cushioned with a couple of hours. So
it is.
If I'm not back by the time you say, I was really expected to be back like 2 hours before that.
Like, let's say you say, if I'm not back by 7, you were already expected to be home between 4 and 5.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
when I hike, I always bring water, a method of filtering more water, a small amount of food, a GPS system, rain gear, and an extra layer, a very small medical kit, and a few other things. They do not take up much space, but could save my life one day. And it could save yours as well.
And if you need ideas on how to pack this, there's a lot online. This is not this is not something that's difficult to figure out. You can easily look up simple hiking med kit. And people will show you in videos how they make their simple med kits with cotton balls.
Our med kit is like
duct tape.
Our med kit is like this big, like literally.
A little bit of gauze.
It has like a Benadryl, an Advil, something to stop bleeding. Mm-hmm. I don't know what else, but I mean, it doesn't have much in it, but it could really help us if we need it.
Yeah,
you know.
If you yourself or someone you know is at risk of suicide, please contact the suicide hotline. We will put it at the bottom of the screen here. Suicide is not a joke. It is not funny. And it hurts not only yourself, but every single person who you love, who's loved you, and who has known you. And it is a terrifying disease that continues throughout families. So please contact the suicide hotline if you or someone you know is at potential risk of suicide.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of House of Crime. We would love to hear your comments about what happened to Keith and what happened to Tom. We'd love to read them. And
I want to hear all the speculation.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you guys next week when we bring you another true crime episode.
Thanks for watching House of Crime.